Welcome to TechWire, a conversation about government, politics, and technology. My name is Christina Gagnier, and today I'm joined by Culp, a principal at Almirante Consulting. Shell, thank you so much for joining us again.
Oh, you're welcome.
So the CIO Academy today is really focusing on agile technology, and I know this is a new concept for government as they're rolling out larger projects, but I'd love to get your point of view of how agile is going to be integrated into the government process.
That's a very interesting question, and I would point out that agile has been around for many, many years. But we have most recently been pursuing development along a traditional method, more like a waterfall approach. And so the agile method of project delivery and management is going to be a little bit of a change, quite a bit of a change actually for a lot of agencies. And there's some work that agencies are going to have to do in order to prepare themselves to make use of the agile tools and to make sure that they have an organization that is open and trusting, because that's what agile is all about.
So you transition out of government into the private sector. What do you think some of the core challenges are going to be in implementing agile technology in government? This is something the private sector has been doing for many years, but government has some different processes.
Yeah, I think controlling the project is going to be a bit of a challenge for government. And what I mean by that is the nature of agile is not to control, to understand through the course of developing the project what you need to be doing. And the way that government has typically pursued software development and technology implementations is to really control that, or try to control that as much as possible. So I think that change is going to be a big one for government.
And what advice do you have for people in government that are currently dealing with this transition?
I would say pay attention to some of the bedrock issues around culture and make sure that you have understood how well prepared your organization is for this kind of change. And there are plenty of publicly available tools out there to do an assessment with your organization. And there's help available as well. But pay attention to the kinds of things that you have to do in order to set yourself up to be successful.
I hear a lot of talk about culture and the culture of government, and this always comes up when you're talking about the government and the implementation of new technology. What do you mean when you talk about culture? Like, what shift needs to happen?
Well, know that, or remember that government is very much designed to be deliberative and slow. And agile as a strategy is the antithesis of that. So you have to understand that when you try and implement something that's very, very different from what you've been doing on a day-to-day, year-to-year, decade-to-decade fashion, it's going to be night and day from how you operate. So you really have to understand how people are going to respond to that, how well that's going to work in your environment, and make adjustments for that.
So speaking of sort of newer trends when it comes to government, open data. That's been a hot topic for a couple years, right? But I know California has put a lot of resources into harnessing open data. I know you started the Open Data Fest. I would love to just hear more about it and what's going to happen this year.
Well, this year we have, Stewards of Change Institute actually runs the Open Data Fest for Health and Human Services, and this year, for the first time, there was a regional event over in Stanford, mid-February, so a little bit earlier this month, and that was an opportunity to hear about how open data may intersect with other kinds of data that are important in trying to figure out how to make people healthier. So the Health and Human Services Open Data Fest was predicated on the notion that if you make more data available to people, they will use it in ways to make themselves healthier. We haven't seen a big impact yet, but it's early on in the cycle. And over at Stanford, we heard a lot of dialogue around how open data can marry up with longitudinal data and provide more value in that equation.
So in terms of open data, what do you think the trends are going to be next for government and open data?
I think that's very much in that ball is very much in the court of GovOps agency, and I believe that they're planning to announce very soon the open data portal for all of government, and what it's going to lead to is more transparency for citizens. It should generate quite a bit more economic activity for civic innovators and civic entrepreneurs. It should provide a lot more data for government to become hopefully more accountable and more data-driven with their decision-making process.
When talking to experts, I'd love to know what you think is going to happen next on the horizon for government technology. So what is that?
Oh, well, I'm hoping that we stop building things and we rent things, right? So move away concertedly from capital expenditures into operational expenditures, and get a lot more familiar with how to do things quickly.
Well, Shel, I know you're a contributing writer to TechWire, and you just wrote a piece on agile technology. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that one is centered on the Child Welfare Services Case Management System as an example of agile. And I think at this point in time, it's probably the largest example in California state government. But really the thesis of that article is something that I've already mentioned, which is pay attention to the underlying conditions under which you will be successful with this approach. And I think the antithesis is if you don't, that's a lot of risk that you're taking on. So you'll either have to mitigate that risk or be prepared for the fallout. Now, the nice thing about Agile is that failure should be embraced, and if you fail faster, then you can course correct faster. I think failure in state government is still not embraced, so that's going to be a bit of a challenge for government as well. Now, I'm not suggesting that the project is going to fail by any stretch. What I'm suggesting is to pay attention to those underlying conditions around culture, around preparedness of the people who are working on the project, and to understand how, what that change is and adjust.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. The culture of Silicon Valley is pretty much about fail fast and fail often. In government, the fail often probably can't happen.
Right. Yeah, it can happen. It's just not really widely accepted as a good thing, right? And and that's almost tragic because failure is where we learn the most.
Well, Shel, thank you so much for joining me again today.
Yeah.
And thank you to our audience for joining us once again in a conversation about government, politics, and technology.